What's up guys, it's River and today we're looking at my top 5 cameras specifically for photography. We're looking at cameras that shoot fast, have great raw codecs, and of course, great color science. So let's do a deep dive, figure out what each camera does and which camera is perfect for you so you can start your transition becoming a photography god. Let's get into it. Also, just to let you guys know, there's a link in the description down below for the best pricing on all the cameras we discussed today. So the first camera on our list is the Sony A6000. Now this is one of the older cameras we will be discussing today, but I wanted to talk about it first. It came out in 2014. That's quite a while ago, but it is still a fantastic camera. It has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, but it does 12-bit RAW and shoots 11 frames per second. That is quite fast and quite impressive for a camera that is only $550. The photos out of the camera are pretty good, middle of the road. Sony generally tends to give you very neutral and flat colors, and they expect you to finesse and massage the photos in post. So if you're somebody that's looking for an affordable camera just to shoot your everyday things in, or if you're a young artist that's willing to put in the extra time and effort to get these photos to look perfect, because if you're willing to put in the time and effort, this camera can easily look as good as an A7 III or a 5D Mark IV. And of course, it has that ultra reliable Sony focus. So for $550, you can get a 16 to 50 millimeter kit lens, which will give you ultra sharp, reliable focus and quite a bit of range with this camera. The camera is very, very well built, though unfortunately it is not weather sealed. However, Sony cameras are known to last forever. So if you do take care of this camera, it will last you quite a while. Sadly, it does not have the infamous IBIS that Sony cameras have. It also does not have a flip-up screen either to the top or the side, so it's not really a vlogging camera, but it does have a flash and it is surprisingly good in low light. It is clean both in photo and video up to 10,000 ISO, and that's pretty impressive for a camera that's from 2014 and only $550. The battery in the Canon A6000 isn't the greatest. It's a small body, therefore a small battery. I wouldn't expect this battery to last me all day, but I think it should be plenty for a few hours of shooting. This is ultimately a very bare bones camera, but in 2014, when this camera came out, it was quite expensive. And if you can pick this up today for $550, I absolutely recommend it. I recommend this camera to anybody that just wants to have a camera around the house to shoot their kids, capture family events, capture their life in a beautiful fashion. Or if you're a young artist that's like, I only have $550, I want to be an artist, I want to make amazing photos, and I'm willing to put in the extra work in Photoshop and Lightroom to really get my images to pop, this will not let you down. The next camera on our list is the Canon RP. It is a full frame camera and is only about $1,000. It's not the fastest camera in the world. It only shoots 5 frames per second in single autofocus and 2.5 in continuous, but for $1,000, this is a fantastic entry point into full frame cameras. I would recommend this camera to young portrait photographers, young fashion photographers, young documentary filmmakers, or photographers. The images coming out of this camera are more than good enough to be on billboards and magazines, as long as you don't need to shoot at a high frame rate, because the sensor technology in this camera is top notch. The only people I wouldn't recommend this camera to are sports photographers and wildlife photographers. The autofocusing system in this camera is very fast and very reliable. It has Canon's dual pixel autofocusing system, which Canon is very well known for. You're going to get very good autofocus both in live view and viewfinder mode. So if autofocusing is a priority for you, like most fashion photographers, this camera will not let you down. The design of this camera is amazing. It's well built and has a rubber grip all the way around it. Honestly, it's like holding Batman's camera. Plus, it has a side articulating screen that you could easily vlog with. This camera would work well for both content creators and vloggers. Sadly, this camera is not weather sealed and it does not have a shutter flap that comes down when the camera is not in use, so dust and grit are definitely an issue. This is not a camera that would ever take out into a treacherous environment, anything with a lot of sand, rain, or moisture. But this camera is very well built and will last you forever if you take care of it. Personally, I think the Canon RP is a fantastic camera, but if there's one thing that holds it back, it's the fact that it does not have the LP6 battery. The Canon LP6 batteries tend to last all day. However, with the new mirrorless body comes a smaller battery, and unfortunately this battery will only last you a few hours. If you're planning to do an all-day shoot, I would definitely pick up a few extra. Other than that, it has all the standard ports like HDMI, USB, and microphone in and out. But one thing to note is that the SD card is down at the bottom next to the battery, not on the side as most professionals prefer. However, I don't think it's that big of a deal, and I personally do not care. Overall, it is a very well-built camera with great and easy-to-use software. The image quality out of this camera is great. The autofocusing system is fast and reliable. And despite it not being the fastest with frame rates, it is a very, very good camera for pretty much all uses. However, there is one big caveat. Exposing with this camera is slightly different. You have to expose this camera more like film rather than digital. What that basically means is you can go from a brighter picture to a darker picture, but you can't really go from a darker picture to a brighter picture. So when using this camera, you really have to either get your exposure just right or play it safe and expose a little bit brighter than you need and bring it back in Photoshop. Last but not least, because this is a new camera system, the newer lenses for this camera are quite expensive. Most of the decent lenses start at about $2,000 to $2,500, which is pretty pricey. But if you own a lot of older Canon L series or EF lenses, with a $200 attachment, you can use all of your older lenses with this camera, which is a pretty good deal. Next up on our list is the Nikon D850. And now this is the most expensive, but also the most technically advanced camera on our list today. The Nikon D850 is $2,900, basically $3,000. But it is a 45 megapixel sensor that shoots at 7 frames per second or 9 with the battery grip. It is an absolute beast. If you can think it, you can shoot it with this camera. The 45 megapixel sensor paired with the 14-bit RAW codec in this camera is made specifically for pro shooters. This is meant for the top of the top, like Ferrari commercials, Vogue magazine, billboards. This is made for pro shooters, and that really shows in its design. This camera is built like a tank and is ergonomically set up specifically for a pro environment. It has dual SD card slots, it's weather sealed, it's rugged, it is up to anything. And of course, with the Pro Style body comes a Pro Style battery. Thanks to the battery in the battery grip and the one that's inside the camera directly, you will get a few days worth of shooting out of this camera. Of course, I don't recommend going to a big shoot without spare batteries, but it's nice to know that the camera has you covered, especially in key moments where you need that shot. The autofocus in this camera is blazing fast. It's really set up for a studio environment. In my testing, I found it struggles a bit in low light. However, this isn't the kind of camera you would really use outside of a studio environment unless you're doing wildlife photography. This is really the type of camera where you would take your time, go slow, and pick your shots. If you were a studio photographer, someone that shoots models, fashion, runway, this camera is a must-have. The amount of resolution you get with this camera is unmatched. You can really go in and touch up every little bit of hair, touch up every little bit of skin tone. It is ridiculous what you can do with this camera. A quick side note, I really wouldn't recommend this camera to sports shooters. Despite it being a rugged, expensive camera, it only shoots 11 to 9 frames per second, and I would say for sports shooting, you need something closer to 11 to 15. However, this camera is pretty bulky, and if you want that resolution without all that heft, I'd recommend looking to the Nikon Z6. It's the exact same sensor, but it's a mirrorless style body, so you don't get all that heft. It's a much lighter, smaller body, plus that body has built-in stabilization, so it's better for low light shooting, and you just get smoother footage. However, that camera is really geared more towards video people, therefore we don't have the same big body style. And something that I have to mention about the Nikon D850, it is extremely impressive in low light. Despite the autofocus not being the greatest in low light, it is an extremely impressive low light camera, mainly because it uses a full frame sensor. This camera gives you very usable images up to 30 and 32,000 ISO, which is extremely impressive for any camera. So if you do wildlife photography or any kind of photography that uses low light or high ISO, this camera will not let you down. Are you someone that wants to keep their camera safe while traveling? If so, this backpack could be perfect for you. Today's sponsor, the Everyday Camera Bag, the camera bag that is designed for everyday life while also keeping your camera safe and secure. They sent me some of their bags. I personally loved having something I could carry my everyday things in with a separate and secure compartment just for my camera gear. And this way, I don't have to buy 2 bags. It combines a secure compartment with a water-resistant design, keeping my camera gear safe and secure while being stylish for everyday use. It's affordable quality that will last for years to come, and it's something every photographer, YouTuber, filmmaker, or any kind of content creator would absolutely love. If you use the code RIVER, you'll get 10% off your purchase for a limited time only. Check out the link in the description to learn more. Next up, we have my favorite camera, and the camera that I use every day for stills, you guessed it, the Fuji X-T3. The camera has a 26 megapixel APS-C size sensor, and it's clean up to 10,000 ISO. It's impressive how clean Fuji cameras are, even at high ISOs. And of course, it shoots at 20 frames per second, so it can pretty much handle anything you throw at it, But the best part about Fuji cameras is the color science. Fuji used to make the original 35mm film prints that we all shot on back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even up to today. And even though photography's become mostly digital, Fuji's taken that photography color science, turned it into a digital algorithm, and put it in their modern digital cameras. So when you shoot with the Fuji camera, you get images that are very, very close to vintage 35mm film, or you're just gonna get colors that you normally just cannot get out of Canon cameras or even Sony cameras. The only thing that really disappoints about this camera is the autofocusing system. Now, it's not bad by any means, but it's definitely not on the same level as the Canon autofocusing system or the Sony autofocus. The camera does really well in single focus mode, but when it comes to tracking subjects, it tends to struggle a bit. But personally, I can forgive all of that just for the color science and the fast frame rates. A quick side note about the X-T3, that it does come with an option for boost mode. Now, boost mode doesn't make your camera that much faster, but it gives you slightly faster autofocus and slightly faster frame rates. I personally never shoot on it, but for those of you that wish this camera had just a little bit of extra horsepower, it is available to you. The only thing I would say this camera is missing is in-body stabilization, but thankfully Fuji puts their stabilization in their lenses, so despite shooting in low light, you will still get very, very stable images. Now, the battery situation in the Fuji X-T3 is kind of interesting. If you use it in standard mode, it should last you a few hours, but if you use it in boost mode, you'll be lucky to get 2 hours out of it. But the great thing about boost mode is that it will speed up your autofocus and give you faster frame rates. Last but not least, the design of the Fuji camera is really unique. Everything on this camera is made to invoke a 35mm vintage feel. The shutter button is its own dial. The aperture is manual, so you actually turn it on the lens itself. The ISO wheel itself is a manual ISO wheel where you can look down and pick specific ISOs. And of course, Fuji isn't dumb. They are a modern company. They have a front and a back wheel to change your shutter and aperture digitally. But if you're somebody that prefers the vintage feel, you can use the vintage buttons or use the dials. It's really up to you, but Fuji has you covered. And the surprising thing about the Fuji cameras, despite them looking super stylish, you would think that they aren't weather sealed, but they actually are, so you're good to go to any environment you want with these cameras. But I have broken a few Fuji cameras in my past, so be careful. I don't think the weather sealing is quite the same as the Canon weather sealing. Last but not least, the Canon 90D. Now, this is an interesting one because it's generally regarded as a video camera, but it has Canon's new APS-C size sensor, which is 32 megapixels, which is actually more than the Canon 5D Mark IV, only by 2 megapixels. But that sensor combined with Canon 14-bit RAW, Canon color science, 11 frames per second, and dual pixel autofocus, I would say this is a very good photo camera. 11 frames per second is plenty fast for wildlife photography and sports photography, and given Canon's 14-bit RAW, you will have tons of dynamic range and tons of resolution to play with. The autofocusing system in this camera is the same as the Canon RP. It's Canon's dual pixel autofocusing system, which is just as good through the viewfinder as it is in live view. A big bonus of this camera is you can natively use the Canon L lenses, which are much cheaper now since Canon has introduced their new RF line. One thing that I really appreciate about this camera is being able to look down and see all my settings on the top LCD. If I'm working in a really fast studio environment or a really fast running gun environment, it's just that much easier to keep track of all my settings and make sure I'm not fudging anything. The camera is weather sealed and has a side articulating screen, which allows you to take this camera pretty much anywhere and shoot from any angle. Last but not least, the battery in this camera is very high capacity and will easily last you all day. Although I don't recommend going anywhere with just one battery, but it's nice to know that I have a high capacity battery that could easily last me a day. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out our top 5 photography camera list. If you are interested in any of the cameras we talked about today, there's a link in the description down below for the best pricing on these cameras. And if you have any questions about any of these cameras, hit me up in the comments down below and I'll make sure to get back to every single one of you. As always, make sure to leave me a like or a comment. It really helps me figure out what kind of content you guys are vibing with, and it helps me figure out what kind of work to make next. As always, make sure to like and subscribe. See you guys next time.